Kia ora to the staff and students of Waimarie High. I'm here to pitch an idea for an integrated learning project. You may ask, what is an integrated learning project? Well, I'm your friendly social studies teacher, Kevin. An integrated learning project is when we're going to be mixing social studies and another subject. In this case, drama. I've got two colleagues. Our history teacher, Liam Foster, is going to be joining us for this project, and Nicole Endicott, our beloved drama teacher, is also going to contribute. An integrated learning project is when we're going to pick a topic, in this case, the Springbok Tour of 1981, very controversial, and we're going to look at it from both a social studies and a drama perspective. So we're going to look at the historical aspects of it, but to help us fully understand, Nicole's going to be coming in from a drama angle, and she's going to be working with our akonga, our students. She's going to be working on various drama workshops. Towards the end of the project, probably in week 6, we're going to be having a performance where all the students are going to mix into groups of 3 or 4, and they're going to act out various scenes from that terrible time in 1981 in New Zealand during the Springbok Tour. The reason myself, Liam and Nicole have chosen the Springbok Tour is we believe it's just a massive pivotal moment in New Zealand history. Now, for those that may not know too much about the Springbok Tour, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview before we go into other aspects of this project. In 1981, New Zealand was one of the few countries willing to play sport with South Africa. South Africa at the time had a white minority government and a system called apartheid, whereby essentially it was separate development for the minority white population and the majority black population. Now, South Africa is the rainbow nation today. It certainly wasn't in 1981. This tour was very controversial because there were various agreements around the world to not play sport with South Africa. In fact, in 1976, New Zealand hosted a tour of South Africa, and that so angered African nations. Most of the African nations boycotted the 1976 Montreal Olympics in Canada. So New Zealand was very much an outlier in 1981 and willing to host a tour of the South African Springbok team.
I was pleased when it went ahead because my policy has always been no politics in sport. But at the same time, after consultation with my colleagues in Cabinet and Caucus, I put the case fairly and squarely to Cess Blasey and the Rugby Union that they should not proceed. I gave him no indication of a personal view.
Our integrated learning project is aimed at Year 9 and 10 students. So I think the perfect fit for it in Level 5 Social Sciences of the New Zealand curriculum is understand how systems of government in New Zealand operate and affect people's lives and how they compare with another system. I mean, this subject is absolutely perfect for that because we have the government of Robert Muldoon and then we have apartheid-era South Africa. So we can compare and contrast race relations in New Zealand. We can compare and contrast the way that the New Zealand government was quite authoritarian in its response to the Springbok Tour. So I think it's going to absolutely fit with the New Zealand curriculum. Perhaps it's these glasses, but I couldn't actually find the Springbok Tour anywhere in the latest Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum, which I think is a bit of a surprise and an omission. Now, I'm sure they're going to be revising this as we go, and I think that they will put the Springbok Tour as an absolute integral part of this. And as I said, maybe it's the glasses, but I couldn't find it in the Aotearoa New Zealand Histories curriculum, which, again, I think is an oversight.
So over the 6 weeks, the social studies aspects of it are broken into weekly units. So in the first week, we're going to be having an overview of what apartheid means. And we're also going to be looking at just a general overview of the protests. In the second week, we're going to cover each big protest. So that's going to be place-based. So we're going to be looking at Christchurch. We're going to be looking at the protests in Wellington. We're going to be looking at the protests at Eden Park. And we're also going to be looking at the protests in Hamilton. The third week is we're going to be looking at key people. So that's John Minto. We're going to be looking at Robert Muldoon. We're going to be learning about Steve Biko, Mandela, and Desmond Tutu. In the third week, we're going to be taking a very Māori-focused perspective, and we're going to look at how the Māori responded to the protests with special focus on the Māori women's movement. In week 5, we're going to be looking at where the students go and interview family members or members of the community where they go and ask people that were involved or maybe were around at the time. And in week 6, we're just going to be spending the majority of the time preparing for the performance. So students are going to be just doing revision, and then eventually by the end of it, they're going to be performing in a way that they find appropriate.
Now, one of the great advantages of doing the 1981 Springbok Tour and doing it in Otatahi, Christchurch, is that we've got plenty of opportunity for place-based learning. I myself have come back to my primary school, where I was 9 at the time of the Springbok Tour, and I'm getting plenty of ideas here. Now, one of the things that we're going to be doing is we'll be able to trace where the Springboks were in 1981. I'd like to get the kids to go and actually try and find out which hotel they stayed at. We're certainly going to be going to have a look at Lancaster Park and around there where there were anti-tour demonstrations.
The importance of place-based learning for this subject in particular is that, as you can see, we're standing outside Lancaster Park, where you had protesters not only storming the field but also engaging in acts of civil disobedience like burning of the New Zealand flag and burning of the South African flag to show this kind of defiance towards the attitudes of both governments. The importance of place-based learning is that you can actually have students come and observe places of history themselves, where they're not just looking in their textbooks, they're not just looking at a screen, where you can actually have students kind of being aware of the barbed wire that would have surrounded the park.
The 1981 Springbok Tour is recent history. It's so recent that when I was a wee nipper at this school, Christ the King School, there were fights at playtime and lunchtimes between children who supported the tour, children that didn't support the tour. I suspect maybe it was their parents that didn't support the tour or the parents that were for the tour. But anyway, the kids actually literally fought at playtimes. There were teachers out on the anti-tour marches, and it was a very topical time. It was like possibly my first memory of New Zealand history, and I want to share that with you.
My mother was old enough to actually be involved in the protests, and she felt obligated to get involved because she felt that she could make a difference internationally, and I know that the protest movement in New Zealand was acknowledged by such people as Desmond Tutu. And also when even Nelson Mandela acknowledged the importance of the New Zealand protests of the Springbok Tour in terms of showing that, that the black South Africans weren't alone. The black South Africans weren't left kind of, they weren't being ignored. There was a kind of a great kind of international concern for the plight of black South Africans all the way here in New Zealand, thousands of kilometres away.
During this time that we're looking at Springbok Tour, we're going to be showing the Konga, the students, some documentaries. We're going to look at 1981's Marita Mita's Patu, which is a fly on the wall. It's cinema verite, and it's all shot on, I think, 16mm films. Fantastic documentary. We're again going to have a look at Brian Bruce's also excellent documentary, 1981 Springbok Tour Revisited, 10 years on. And finally, we'll have a look at I think it's a TVNZ in-house documentary. It's got a lot of Bill Ralston, and it's quite revisionist. Now, what I'd like students to do is look at snippets of these documentaries, and you'll see how history changes with time. 1991's Brian Bruce is actually quite, I would say, progressive, whereas the 2001 documentary has a lot of policemen.
Students will learn about some of the important people related to the Springbok Tour, such as the Prime Minister at the time, Robert Muldoon. They'll learn about some of the leaders of the protests, such as John Minto. They'll learn about some of the key South African characters such as Nelson Mandela and Steve Biko, and kind of other African supporters such as Desmond Tutu, who are crucial to the having an understanding of the time, but also kind of examining the support that these people had or the resistance that these people had to the tour.